please turn your cell phones, put them on silent if you would. If it's anything like mine, it's sure to ring or text or buzz right just as soon as I get started talking. We want to welcome everyone who's come out today to witness what we consider to be a very, not only just a historic event in the context of the way in which criminal justice or criminal injustice has been dished out here in the county of Alameda and frankly throughout this country. We're here to announce the filing of a federal civil rights lawsuit on behalf of two gentlemen, on behalf of two sons, on behalf of two fathers who were essentially kidnapped and taken away from their families for years, forced to have to fight for their innocence, steadfastly proclaim their innocence, and yet were victimized and abused by way of the criminal justice system. Who and what we're here to talk about are Giovante Douglas and Cartier Hunter, two men who grew up here in the Bay Area, two men who were robbed of close to a decade of their life, in the prime of their life, due to the unlawful, illegal, despicable, and criminal conduct of an Oakland police officer. An officer who was duty-bound and sworn to uphold the law, to administer the law according to the Constitution. And instead, he perverted the justice that was handed out to these two gentlemen. Phong Tran is now facing criminal charges for what he did. And hopefully he too will pay the price for the injustice that he engaged in. But in the aftermath of what he did, perjured testimony, bought and paid for testimony, suppressing that evidence from these men so they couldn't have the proper criminal defense and expose his misdeeds, they suffered not only through jail, but also prison. The horrors of prison, the nightmares of prison, the reality of what it means to be snatched from your family and thrown into a world where you have to not only learn new skills and new survival tactics, but upon their release, given no resources, very little support other than the family, the friends, and the community who supported them throughout this ordeal. Not only did these two young men suffer, but their family and their kids suffered. For those of you out there who are watching this, who are parents or have nieces and nephews and family members, extended family members, and bonus children that you look after who love you, imagine just being taken from their life and having this heinous charge put on you, a criminal charge and a conviction put on you, all the while proclaiming your innocence, only to figure out after you've been shipped away from your family, separated from your loved ones, your roots ripped out of this community, as you fought, clawed, and scratched to survive through prison, the truth finally reveals itself. The truth that puts you in this position to begin with. A position that you didn't ask for, but one that you were thrust into. That position manufactured by an Oakland police officer, an investigator who took perjured testimony, who paid for testimony, who supported perjury, put it before a jury, put it before a judge, took the stand, all the while knowing that he was sending two innocent men to prison. That is why we have come here today to announce the filing of this federal civil rights lawsuit. On behalf of Giovante, Douglas, and Cartier Hunter. And on behalf of the children that suffered with them, the relationships that they lost, the family who financially and emotionally supported them through this ordeal. This is something that is not some movie, a horror movie, that we may have all seen and watched on a Saturday night while popping popcorn. This is what the day-to-day day-in life was for these two young men and the people who supported them. It was a never-ending nightmare. One that was filled with lies, perjury, paid-for testimony, a prison sentence and conviction for murder. Imagine being sentenced to life, to serve the rest of your natural life behind bars for something you did not do. But yet, the police, the justice system, supported this wrongful conviction. Imagine going into and being sent and shipped away from your family, forced to live in high maximum security prisons, where your life is in danger every single day for something that you did not do, but instead was done to you and to you. These young men had the intestinal fortitude to never fold, to never break, to stand up straight and to proclaim their innocence despite all the odds being against them. And now they're here today in that same position with their backs straight, heads held high, demanding that they receive the justice that they so desperately need and deserve, which is for those who did this to them to be held accountable and for them to be compensated for the wrongs to be made right, for all the harms, for all the birthdays, for all the holidays, for all the hugs, for all the family celebrations that they couldn't participate in, for all the nights where they would rather have been tucking their children, their child into bed, and instead they were laying on a bunk with a stranger. Instead of pushing their child on the swing at the park, instead they're walking a maximum security prison yard, hoping that they don't fall victim to the violence that runs rampant in California State Prison, where people are knifed, killed, tortured, slaughtered, abused, violated on a daily basis, knowing that you did not do the very thing that you were sentenced, convicted, and prosecuted and thrown away for. So as we now announce this federal civil rights lawsuit on behalf of these two young men, I want everybody to keep that in mind. There's no level, no amount of money that can give these young men back the years they lost and the tears they surely shed as they were walked off, shackled and chained behind walls and doors and separated from the people they loved and that loved them. Now I'm going to ask my partner, Patrick Buelna, if you want to say a few words about this. We're going to have Patrick Buelna, our partner Buelna, come forward and share a few words. Thank you.
Just to reiterate what Giovante said, and what these young men went through is something that is so tremendously horrific. No person other than them could ever imagine the depth of pain and suffering that they went through. That they were put in there by pure evil. And we know that eventually evil does come to light. And it has come to light through these two men. And through these two men who were willing to stand up for themselves even when faced with a life sentence. How many people in this world have that courage, have that steadfastness? How many people in the world have the family and friends who would stand by them as they face these lies? And they didn't believe them. And these men didn't believe them. And I'm sure that amongst those years, they thought to themselves and doubted themselves. And yet they remained true to the truth and they held on to it. And so this society, this culture, this justice system that promised to protect them, that so gravely sinned, so gravely harmed this family at its very core, needs to make its amends. And it will never be putting these men back to where they would have been, the future that they lost, the potential that they lost. They can only now try to recover and gather up what they have and try to make a life for themselves But we as a society and this government and this criminal justice system owes everything to these men for sticking up for the principles of truth and justice and honesty that it was the government's responsibility to uphold, but these men did it themselves. And so we're here to announce this lawsuit on behalf of them to try to get a shred of justice, a shred of compensation that will never go far enough. And so me and our firm are honored to represent these men and what this case stands for.
Thank you, Patrick. That's Patrick Buelna. Now we're going to hear from Lateef Gray, who's also the lead, one of the lead attorneys on this case. Mr. Gray, want to have a few words for it?
Sure. So good morning, everybody. The reason why we chose these steps at this particular location is because this is the scene of the crime. It was in this building, 2016, where defendant Tran presented the perjured testimony. It was in this building where defendant Tran presented the concocted testimony. So we thought it would only be fitting to show up here, which is the scene of the crime, and announce that we filed this lawsuit. I don't want to go over everything that's been discussed. I know you guys are wondering why I picked this location. That's the reason why. This is the scene of the crime. With that, I don't have anything else to say.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. And I want to just emphasize and underscore what he said. This courthouse that's behind us, the Alameda County Renee C. Davidson Courthouse, where our community comes to with the expectation of receiving justice, of having crimes addressed, was itself the scene of the crime. This is the place that's supposed to be the hallowed hall of justice, where these two young men received nothing but injustice. And right now, we'll allow them, in their own words, to speak. If you should like to, you want to address? Anybody, Mr. Davis? As you can see from Mr. Douglas, this is not just a lawsuit that's written on a piece of paper. This was his life. This is the proof, the evidence, the carnage that Officer Tran caused these young men to have to suffer through the torture of being criminally prosecuted, convicted, labeled a murderer, all supported by lies, by perjury, by paid-for testimony from a disgraced officer of the law. I can only imagine how deep this pain runs for these two young men who stood tall through it all, declaring their innocence, and now they take the fight to the federal courthouse for the justice they deserve. Mr. Hunter, would you like to say any words to that?
Can't sum it all up, so I can really talk.
Whoever said can't sum it all up. That's because the harms, the losses, the damage that Officer Tran and any enabler within the justice system, the list is almost too long to pronounce or announce or identify all the inhumane treatment that they suffered as a result of Tran and his house of lies, his web of lies. As you know, Officer Tran took the stand in this very building, perjured himself, testifying under oath that he did not know the star witness. That after his stalled investigation into the murder of a young man in our community, and his loss of life is not to be glossed over either. Because we didn't just lose one person. Instead, we lost three. Instead, we lost many more. Because we all were affected by the ripple effect of Tran's web of lies. And so, when you think about what it meant for these young men to go to sleep in prison, to walk a level 4 maximum yard and see people knifed and killed just feet from you. And when I've listened to the stories of what it means to come to grips with, in these institutions, life is cheap. In these institutions, when you ask for help, it's ignored. In these institutions called prison, they're more akin to a torture chamber than they are about anything about rehabilitation. And we're not naive enough to believe for 1 second that what this officer, this disgraced officer who is now facing felony criminal charges did is only limited to these 2 young men. We're not naive enough to know that the comfort that he had to take the stand multiple times with supervisors, district attorneys, everyone sanctioning that conduct and issuing checks for paid for testimony, that was the first time and the only time he did that. We have reason to believe, just based upon the way in which he conducted himself, that what he did is not an isolated incident. It's not an isolated event. And we stand ready to fight on behalf of anyone else who has been victimized and abused by this disgraced officer's conduct. With that being said, are there any questions? If there are any, we're here to answer them.
What do you hope comes out of this in the end? What do you want to see change?
No one should face a situation where they've been dragged through the mud, their good name tarnished, their family ripped apart, uprooted from the home and the family that they've grown to love and loves them, labeled a murderer, sent away, hauled off to prison, and then hid behind bars, steel, and concrete from their kids, forced to interact over a jail phone and pictures and through glass. Young men couldn't even hug the children that bear their name. The mother that bore them, you can't celebrate Mother's Day with your mom the way that we can. You can't help your child blow out the cakes of their candle. See them off to their first day at school. Pick them up from child care. Push them on the swing at the park. Take them to the circus and any other list of things that we all may take for granted. We hope that no one has to go through this. And we hope for a systemic change. And that anytime this has happened in the past, those persons who have been victimized receive justice that they deserve. We hope that this officer is never allowed to be in a position where he can do this to anyone else. Every case that this officer has touched should be scrutinized. Every conviction that he has secured with perjured, bought for, concoction of lies and money should be unraveled and undone. Because that is not justice. That is not what the Constitution calls for. And that is not what our community demands. So when you ask what we want reform, we want change, we want to restore hope, and we want accountability for those who did harm to these young men, anyone else who found themselves in their position.
I just want to add one thing to that, and that's, we also hope that with the same ferocity that the system hunted down these men, used all of its resources, all of its tools, all of its legal prowess, all of its police prowess to convict them wrongfully, right, with a crime. It was a criminal action. Not to mince words, this officer committed crimes to get these gentlemen convicted. With that same exact ferocity to put them away, we hope they use that same ferocity now that they know the truth to convict this officer, to root out of this system every piece of evil and damage this officer did, and with the same exact ferocity, and if not more, to compensate, to make amends with these gentlemen. There's been no apologies. There's been no letters. There's been no one showed up at their houses from the city or from anywhere else to say, we did wrong here, I'm sorry. Nothing. They've heard nothing. And so we hope with the same ferocity they were willing to endorse a crime by an officer, that they, with that exact same energy, make amends to these gentlemen.
Great point, Patrick. And so with that being said, we want to thank everyone for coming out today. Please join us on our journey for justice. You can keep up with the going-ons in this case, the updates, and support these young men as best you can through this trying time. Thank everyone for their support. My name is Giovante, Patrick Buelna, TJ, Giovante Douglas, Cartier Hunter. We are lawyers for the people. Thank you.